I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam my folder shut. I simply lifted my glasses, looked across the long walnut conference table at the three people who had spent years mocking me, and said a single sentence that froze the room solid. As of this morning, your employment contracts with Caldwell Industries are formally expired. The confusion on their faces lasted only an instant before panic began creeping in, subtle at first, then rising like heat. My nephew Ryan's jaw dropped. My sister-in-law Linda shuffled her papers as if searching for an escape clause that didn't exist. And my brother Michael, the one who had always laughed the loudest at my quiet, leaned forward as though volume alone could rewrite the truth I had brought with me. But the words were final, ironclad, and backed by months of documentation. Still, none of them spoke. For the first time in years, silence belonged to them. It amazed me how quickly power shifts the moment truth is laid neatly on the table. They had spent years calling me a ghost in meetings, joking that I floated in silently and drifted out just the same, dismissing every contribution I attempted to make. They had counted on my restraint, my patience, my refusal to enter the shouting matches they called strategy sessions. They believed silence was weakness. But silence had been my study. My advantage. My shield. Now the quiet they mocked had become the quiet that threatened their livelihoods. I watched each of them inhale shallowly, trying to calculate what parts of their lives could unravel in the next hour. I said nothing more. I wanted them to sit in the stillness they had always feared, the stillness they never allowed me. And as they stared at the contracts I had set before them, signed, sealed, time-stamped, they finally realized something they had never bothered to learn: I never speak unless I already know the ending. The silence pressed in around them until it became almost audible. Their careers, salaries, reputations, everything they had built inside our family company, they now hung by a thread so thin it might snap with a breath. And finally Michael whispered, voice cracking, "You can't do this." But I could. And I had. Because the truth was simple. Their contracts had already expired. And they were the last to know. My name is Evelyn Caldwell, and I am 62 years old. For most of my adult life, I have been described as reserved, soft-spoken, or, my personal favorite, the quiet one in the corner. I'm not shy. I'm not meek. I simply speak when there is something worth saying, and when I speak, I prefer to speak with accuracy. I come from a generation where your voice matters more when it's not wasted. My family never quite understood that. They were loud, theatrical, reactive. When my father founded Caldwell Industries decades ago, he used to say that the family's energy was our strength. But he also told me once, in a rare private moment, that every engine needs a stabilizer, and that I was his. He trusted me with the details no one else had the patience to parse. After he passed, however, the company shifted, and my place in it seemed to shrink as the more boisterous personalities in the family took over the meeting rooms. People assume that age softens ambition, but I have found the opposite. 62 feels sharper than 40 ever did. My sense of justice has grown firmer, my tolerance thinner, my vision clearer. Perhaps that is why, when the disrespect escalated from ignorance to mockery, something in me, quiet, steady, but deeply rooted, refused to bend anymore. Outside of work, my life is peaceful. I tend a garden that blooms with stubborn resilience, much like myself. I walk before sunrise. I read thick historical biographies with slow, deliberate pleasure. I have no desire to dominate a room. I simply refuse to be erased from one. And yet, for years at Caldwell Industries, erasure was exactly what happened. Subtle at first. Then deliberate. The interruptions. The jokes. The "Evelyn doesn't mind" assumptions. The silence they weaponized against me. They mistook dignity for passivity, and they dressed their condescension as family bonding. But there is a special kind of strength in someone who has spent a lifetime listening more than speaking. When you listen, you learn. When you learn, you prepare. And when you prepare, you become someone your enemies never see coming. My family had always been chaotic, but after my father passed, chaos became culture. My brother Michael, 3 years younger than me, evolved into the unofficial head of the table. His voice carried the loudest, and to him, volume equaled leadership. He had inherited my father's charisma but none of his caution. His wife, Linda, thrived beside him, performing efficiency without possessing it. She organized lunches, pre-meeting pep talks, and gossip disguised as strategy. And their son, Ryan, newly promoted despite an unimpressive track record, believed the company owed him authority simply because he shared the Caldwell name. I had been part of the company for decades longer than all three combined. I managed operations with a finesse that kept our supply chains intact during recessions and industry shifts. Yet they referred to me as Aunt Evelyn from admin, a title that carried the weight of dismissal. Family dinners became extensions of boardroom politics, and boardroom conversations became rehearsals of the same inside jokes at my expense. I wasn't excluded. I was diminished. It was always subtle enough to appear harmless. "Oh, Evelyn won't care," they would say when making decisions without me. "She's our quiet thinker," they'd chuckle during meetings while talking over me. Worse still were the times they mimicked my deliberate pauses, exaggerating them for laughs. I endured it because I believed professionalism meant rising above family pettiness. I believed that if I worked hard enough, the results would speak louder than their comments. But results are quiet. And mockery is loud. One evening, after yet another meeting where my insights were ignored only to be reused minutes later by Ryan, who received applause for them, I drove home with a heaviness that felt unfamiliar. I sat in the driveway watching dusk settle over my hedges and realized I had been allowing myself to shrink in a space I had helped build. My father's voice surfaced in my memory: "Stabilizers don't wobble, Evelyn. They stay centered while everything else shakes." I decided then that I would stop waiting for respect to be given to me out of decency. I would earn it through truth, precision, and the calmness they misunderstood. I didn't want revenge. Not then. What I wanted was restoration, of balance, of order, of the dignity they had chipped away at for years. But restoration sometimes requires removing what threatens the foundation. And my family, blinded by entitlement, had no idea they were standing on ground that was shifting beneath them. The true betrayal didn't happen in a meeting. It happened in an email chain I wasn't supposed to see. One evening, while reviewing upcoming contract renewals, I discovered that the employment terms for 3 executive family positions, Michael's, Linda's, and Ryan's, were set to expire within the year. Nothing unusual. Contracts expire, they renew, they adjust. But when I looked into the renewal schedule, something was missing: signatures, approvals, documentation. Their contracts, by all legal standards, were on track to lapse. Curious, I searched further. And that's when I found the email. It was a thread between the 3 of them, dated months earlier, discussing a plan to streamline the executive oversight process. In simpler terms, remove me from operational decision-making. They believed that once their new contracts were auto-renewed, under what they called the Family Continuity Clause, they could vote to reassign my duties to Ryan and move me into a symbolic role. A symbolic role. Decorative. Ceremonial. Quiet. They wanted to steal not my job but my authority, my years of work, my identity within the company. They had even joked about how I wouldn't object because she never objects to anything. The arrogance was almost breathtaking. The problem for them was simple: the continuity clause had expired alongside their contracts. And no renewal existed. They had been operating under the assumption that paperwork, like loyalty, would magically sustain itself. But paperwork obeys no ego. Contracts end when they end. I sat at my desk, the glow of the monitor reflecting the steady pulse of my heartbeat. Betrayal washed over me with a strange calm. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I simply understood something very clearly: they had underestimated the wrong woman. They thought silence meant absence. But silence, when used correctly, is strategy. And now, I held the truth that could dismantle everything they had built on entitlement and carelessness. Over the next several weeks, I became meticulous. My silence, once mocked, turned into the quiet rhythm of preparation. I reviewed every contract clause, timestamp, digital signature, and renewal policy. I revisited archived board minutes. I found the legal precedents my father had insisted on decades ago, which required unanimous board approval for any family contract renewal, a step they had skipped entirely because they assumed their positions were guaranteed. I sent nothing. Said nothing. Reacted to nothing. Then I contacted attorney Marcia Levine, a woman renowned for her precision and discretion. She reviewed the documents with a highlighter's fury and, after several hours, leaned back with a slow exhale. "Evelyn," she said, "they have no legal standing. Their contracts expired months ago. You are well within your rights to proceed." Proceed. Such a small word. Such a heavy one. Marcia drafted the formal notices, each letter crisp, factual, emotionless. She instructed me on how to deliver them, how to handle the transition, and how to protect the company during the change in leadership. I listened carefully, nodding at each instruction, absorbing every detail. Silence again was my ally, it kept my intentions unreadable. Meanwhile, my family continued their charade of dominance. Ryan bragged about strategies he didn't understand. Linda corrected my reports with suggestions I politely ignored. Michael dismissed my budget warnings with a wave of his hand. They had no idea that each misstep went into a folder, a detailed chronology of incompetence to protect the company from future litigation. When the final financial quarter approached, the timing aligned perfectly. Their positions required contract renewals before the new fiscal year. But this year, those renewals would never come. I placed the 3 sealed envelopes in my briefcase the night before the meeting. I ran my hand over the leather surface and felt an unfamiliar sensation rising in my chest, not triumph, not revenge, but clarity. Tomorrow, the silence they mocked would be the silence that ended their tenure. I didn't sleep much the night before the meeting. Not from nerves, but from anticipation. I walked through the sequence of events in my mind, rehearsing each step the way one rehearses a delicate presentation. There would be no shouting match. No accusations. No dramatics. Only truth, process, and consequence. When I arrived at the office, the hallway lights flickered with the cool hum of early morning. The conference room was still empty, bathed in the soft glow of sunrise. I set the envelopes in my usual seat, placed my notes neatly beside them, and breathed in deeply. This was not vengeance. This was correction. When the others filtered in, loud and rushed as always, they barely acknowledged me. Ryan joked loudly about my silent stare, unaware that the stare already held the end of his employment. Michael began the meeting with one of his long-winded monologues about family legacy. The irony was striking. Halfway through the agenda, I lifted my hand. The room fell into brief, mocking silence, an invitation for jokes they didn't have time to deliver. Instead, I calmly said, "Before we proceed, there is a matter we must address." I slid the envelopes across the table. Their expressions shifted from confusion to mild amusement, then to something harder. I watched each face as they read, absorbing the language crafted with legal precision. Ryan was the first to speak. "Aunt Evelyn, what is this?" "Documentation," I said quietly, "that your employment contracts expired months ago. You have been operating without legal authority. Effective today, your roles are discontinued pending a full board review." Michael scoffed, then bristled, then faltered. No, this is ridiculous. We're family. And Caldwell Industries," I replied, "is a company. It requires compliance." That was the moment. The pivot. The reversal of years of disrespect. I did not raise my voice. I did not gloat. I simply stood, gathering my papers, and said, "You believed my silence meant inaction. It meant preparation." The fallout unfolded quietly, almost poetically. The board convened within 72 hours. Presented with evidence, timelines, email threads, and contract clauses, they had little difficulty concluding that my family had been operating without valid employment terms. Their termination became a matter of protocol rather than punishment. Michael tried appealing to legacy. The board responded with policy. Linda tried appealing to sentiment. The board responded with compliance. Ryan tried appealing to youth and potential. The board responded with results, and his were non-existent. The removal was swift. Their company badges deactivated. Their access revoked. Their titles stripped. But the true consequence wasn't the termination. It was the silence that followed, the silence they were forced to sit with, because no amount of noise could undo the truth. Their reputations suffered as news circulated quietly among industry partners. No scandal, no drama, just the quiet echo of accountability. For years, they had spoken over me. Now they had no platform to stand on. I stepped in as interim operations director, supported unanimously by the board. Employees who had once watched my family belittle me now saw a different version of me, calm, determined, capable. Respect grew not from fear but from clarity. My family retreated into embarrassment, whispering among themselves, searching for a narrative that might frame them as victims. But documents don't lie. Procedures don't bend for ego. Silence doesn't erase facts, it reveals them. Their downfall wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply the natural consequence of neglecting the details and underestimating the person who mastered them. In the weeks that followed, I found myself breathing differently, deeper, steadier. My home felt warmer. My mornings brighter. Even the quiet in my garden felt different, like a companion rather than a confinement. I didn't hate my family. I didn't celebrate their failure. I mourned what could have been, a collaborative legacy built on respect instead of ego. But I also understood that their downfall had been years in the making, seeded by arrogance and watered by carelessness. I invited none of them to discuss it. My door remained open, but they didn't approach. Perhaps shame kept them away. Perhaps they feared the version of me who no longer allowed herself to be dismissed. Either way, the distance felt healthy. Necessary. Balanced. At the company, I implemented new policies that strengthened contract oversight and reduced the influence of nepotism. Employees thanked me privately, relieved to see fairness restored. I realized then how many people had also suffered under the noise and chaos my family created. One afternoon, while packing some documents in my father's old office, I found a note he had written to himself years ago. It said, "Evelyn sees everything. Trust her when others don't." I smiled, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in years. My father had understood me. Even if the others never had. Peace, I learned, isn't found in silence alone. It's found in a life aligned with truth. When people ask how I found the courage to confront my family, I tell them the truth: courage isn't loud. It's steady. It's the quiet decision made at a kitchen table when no one is watching. It's choosing truth over comfort, dignity over avoidance, clarity over chaos. Silence is not weakness. Silence is space, space to observe, to prepare, to rise. My family mocked that silence for years. They believed noise created power. But real power lives in understanding, in patience, in the knowledge that you don't need to shout to be heard. If there is a lesson in my story, it is this: never underestimate the person who speaks last. They are the one who has taken the time to learn the truth. And truth, unlike noise, does not fade. It transforms. It restores. It reveals what was always waiting beneath the surface. For me, it revealed the strength I had mistaken for restraint. For them, it revealed the consequences they thought would never come. And for anyone listening, let your silence be intentional, not imposed. Let it be your foundation, not your cage. And when you finally choose to speak, may your words carry the weight of preparation and the clarity of justice.